truth trackers those who built UFOs. Viktor Schauberger was born on June 30, 1885 in Austria. Born in the Austrian Alps, he always wanted to be a forester like his father before him, and his father's father before him. As a boy, he would spend whole days exploring the forest, studying the mountain streams, and observing wildlife. It was here where Schauberger developed his theory of implosion. He noticed that in untouched mountain streams a cycloidal motion would occur. He began to study and test this cycloidal motion in water. Schauberger noticed at a temperature of +4 degrees Celsius, hydrogen and oxygen would separate and combine. He noticed how trout would swim upstream, even in a strong current, and jump up waterfalls when necessary. Schauberger believed the trout used an undiscovered energy in the water. Using what he learned from his own studies, he began constructing log flumes that would come to shock leading scientists in his day. Logs twice the weight of the water, and even large rocks, would float in Schauberger's log flumes. Testing his theories, Schauberger began to develop inventions, including an apparatus that would make water from air. Witnesses who drank this water said that it cured illness and revitalized the body. Schauberger tried to explain the natural phenomena that gave rise to understanding this implosion power and what he termed diamagnetism and its opposites in the following way. Hydrogen H becomes active by cooling and combines with the passive oxygen O to produce a concentrated form of energy of lift and growth. He termed this biological magnetism. One example of biological magnetism's levitation tendency can be seen in that of a plant. As a plant grows, it is attracted towards sunlight, influencing its growth, while simultaneously increasing its weight, and consequently the force of gravity, whereas oxygen O is activated by heat. Schauberger would say, every oven burns better by adding oxygen. The oxygen O burns and combines with the passive hydrogen H to produce a dispersing energy, which results in decomposition. This occurs with every explosion. Heat is a result. Heated water is the lowest form of water. It decomposes the water and loses energy, as molecules are redistributed when heat is generated. The predominating hydrogen H combines with oxygen O instead of O with H, as would be necessary for organic growth. Water, as in the sap of plants and blood, becomes stale, lacking in higher quality matter, and burns up due to the excess of oxygen. Decomposition sets in, and cancer develops. Schauberger demonstrated his theories through his inventions. Word of mouth spread until one day he caught the attention of the German government. A letter was delivered to a Viktor Schauberger, requesting his presence at the German embassy in order to receive a visa to go for an audience with Adolf Hitler. This was just before World War II. Hitler had just become Chancellor of Germany, and the Nazi movement was in full effect. Schauberger came to meet Hitler, who showed himself to be well informed about his earlier work, and he requested a thorough explanation of his ideas and his scientific research. Schauberger requested that the meeting be private, between just him and Hitler. To this Hitler had agreed, but as he entered Hitler's study, who should be present but Ministerial Director Wilhelm, the senior official of the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, with whom Schauberger had had a bitter argument in the past. Schauberger was, however, allowed to speak without interruption for 1 hour. He described the fallacies of the technologists and what he considered to be misconceptions in Hitler's 4-year plan. When he had finished, Hitler asked, "What would you put in place of the generators and methods we have today?" Schauberger answered, "Give me facilities and staff, and the materials I shall need, and in a few months you will see my methods of producing energy. Then you can decide for yourself which is the most efficient method with the best potential." Hitler responded, "What would be the source of fuel for your generators?" Schauberger responded, "Water and air. They contain all the power that we will ever need." Hitler pushed a button, and the state secretary Kepler entered. Hitler said, "Give this Austrian, who has ideas that interest me. All he needs to prove that he is right." Schauberger had no choice but to do as Hitler requested. When he arrived, he was taken to a concentration camp in Mauthausen, where he was to contact SS Colonel Zieres, who told him he had a personal greeting from Himmler. At this greeting, Schauberger was told the Nazi Party had considered his scientific research important, believed in his theories, and he was given a choice. He could either take charge of a scientific team of technicians and physicians from among Nazi prisoners in order to develop his machines, or he could be hanged. The choice is his. Schauberger understandably chose the first, insisting that his helpers no longer be regarded as prisoners. And so Schauberger began his work in a Nazi concentration camp. In top secret, Schauberger worked until the SS college, where the research was taking place, was bombed. After the bombing, Schauberger and his team were transferred to Liechtenstein, near Linz. The top secret project, or Wunderwaffe, Wonder Weapon as called by Hitler, initiated there, was named a flying saucer and said to have been powered by a trout turbine. Schauberger was clear about the principle of his flying saucer construction. If water or air is rotated into a twisting form of oscillation known as colloidal, a buildup of energy results, which, with immense power, can cause levitation. This form of movement is able to carry with it its own means of power generation. The principles of this machine leads logically to its application in the design of aircraft or submarine, requiring almost no motive power. Viktor Schauberger later explained this briefly. In a letter to the West German Defense Minister Strauss on the 28th of February 1956, Schauberger states, "I preferred the first alternative." And about a year later, the first flying saucer rose unexpectedly at our first attempt, struck the ceiling, and then was wrecked. A few days later, an American group appeared, who seemed to somehow understand what was happening, and they seized everything. As the war came to a close, an important part of the flying saucer apparatus was also found in my apartment by the Russians and taken. In 1952, after the war, Schauberger had bad asthma and periodically suffered from a weak heart. Even so, he continued his work despite mounting difficulties. The Implosion machine had been a particularly heavy drain, both financially and physically on him. At that time, he was known to be in the company of two Americans. Before long, him and his son Walter were constantly taking flights back and forth from the United States. It is said Schauberger and his son were taken to Texas, near the Red River, and allowed no communications with the outside world. He began his work for the Americans under strict orders that all things be put into writing at all times. Schauberger's test and drawings were sent to an expert in atomic technology for analysis. In September, this expert, from the state of New York, took part in a 3-day conference in Texas. His findings were conclusive. He summarized his views saying, "The path to which Mr. Schauberger laid in his treatise, and with his models, is the biotechnical path of the future. What Schauberger proposes and says and asserts is correct, and in 4 years, all this will be confirmed." 3 months had passed, and Schauberger insisted that him and his son be able to return to Europe. The Americans had saw things differently, however, saying to Schauberger, now that results are so satisfactory, he must stay in America. A matter so revolutionary as this demands a sacrifice. The Americans insisted, adding, "For the next few years, you will both be given accommodations in the region of Arizona." The Schaubergers disagreed with such a plan. Eventually, Schauberger was told that he could return home, but in doing so, he must agree to take courses in the English language. He was given 30 minutes to decide. One of the Americans present translated this proposition. After a heated argument with both Schaubergers, to Viktor there was no choice. Under duress, he agreed to the proposition. His son, Walter Schauberger, was asked to sign a contract, but he refused. This contract stated that Viktor Schauberger was prohibited from passing over any knowledge of his work, past, present or future, and must keep in contact with a Mr. Oddie or Robert Donner. It was made clear to his son that if he did not keep silent in this respect, Viktor Schauberger would be silenced by middlemen based in Munich. In accordance with the Texas Agreement, the boss, Mr. Oddie Robert Donner would have the right to sell the Schauberger case, either wholly or in part, to other groups while in transit, without any rest. Viktor Schauberger and his son returned to Austria. After a 19-hour flight, Schauberger was unable psychologically to overcome this ordeal and began to vegetate, as if his brain, his intelligence, his spiritual being, all his thoughts belonged to Mr. Oddie. 5 days after Schauberger had returned home, on the 25th of September, 1958, Viktor Schauberger died, in Linz, at the age of 73. Despairingly he repeated over and over again, "They took everything from me, everything. I don't even own myself."